Morgana Tumbley. Sure, I've heard of her. She's one of the few spooks who turned down an invitation to join the agency. That was long before my time, though.
Carla nodded. Long before my time, too. I heard about her from one of my handlers when I was an investigator. She's been a thorn in the agency's side ever since, but now she's overstepped. Killian nodded as he read over the case files.
Appears she has quite a colorful reputation. She takes 2 or 3 living every decade, though the agency seems to look the other way.
Carla looked less than pleased. We do not look the other way. The agency has been sending in investigators and facilitators for years, but Morgana is difficult.
How so?
Killian wasn't used to seeing Carla dance around the issues. Most spirits either move on, linger, or become geists, right? Carla asked, taking 3 pens out of her desk and laying them in a line.
Yeah, it's the nature of spirits.
Well, Morgana has decided to sit somewhere between spirit and geist. Killian wrinkled his nose.
Is that even possible?
Well, you saw Jonathan Weston in his realm. The nature of spirits is changing somehow.
How is that even possible? You told me that the rules of the hereafter were pretty static.
Carla shrugged. Energy patterns, death tolls, chemtrails, hell, vaccination rates. I don't know. All I know is that ghosts are changing, and not always for the better. Something's going on, and no one is sure what it is. Killian looked back at the file, trying not to think about that too hard.
So part of the problem is that Morgana has this moving home space.
Yeah, Carla piped up, glad to be moving on. In life, Morgana owned a riverboat. It operated as a casino, but it also worked as a nest for her little birds. Morgana was a notorious madam who cruised up and down the Louisiana coast and attracted clients from all walks of life. In death, she still roams, and her little birds still attract the eyes of men and women alike. Some of her clients leave again, changed drastically by their time on board the Lady's Fancy. Some, however, are never seen again, and that is becoming more and more of a problem. Killian turned the page and whistled as he looked at the numbers.
She's got over 100 living souls on that riverboat?
Carla didn't answer. She didn't need to. 2 nights ago, Morgana held a grand event, gamblers and politicians rubbing elbows with those who haven't had elbows to rub in decades. When daybreak came, none of them disembarked the ghost ship. It's been docked for the last 2 days, and no one has come off of it. Worse yet, people keep going aboard. We're afraid that when it leaves, it's going to take all aboard with it. We want you to go on and see what you can find out about Carla.
And me without my formal wear.
This is serious, Killian. If she leaves with all those on board, it would be the largest spiritual abduction in centuries. There's no telling how much she would grow from that, and the higher-ups don't want to find out.
Okay.
Killian sighed deeply. His brevity was never appreciated around here.
So what's the job? Am I plugging Morgana? Trying to get people to leave? What's the play here?
Reconnaissance. Only reconnaissance, Carla said, growling the words as she spoke them. You are not to engage Morgana unless absolutely necessary. And for God's sakes, don't draw attention to yourself. Find out what the intentions are and call in for backup. Take this, she said, handing him a sharp-looking derby hat. Killian regarded it, making a face as he spun it in his hand.
I'm more of a fedora man myself. Seems like sacrilege against Humphrey to wear something with this little style.
What it lacks in style, it more than makes up for in appearance. It belonged to one Michael Pulser, a reporter in the New Orleans area who recently stepped into traffic without looking. His untimely demise is your good fortune, however, because when you wear his hat, people will think that you're him. Killian laughed, putting the hat down over his own, where it came down snugly and seamlessly.
Wow, Moneypenny. Making me feel like a super spy here.
Carla cocked her head. Moneypenny? Who's that?
Don't worry about it, Carla. Well, I'll go get what you're looking for. But, there are easier ways to get me to take a vacation.
Oh, trust me, Carla said, as Killian got up and headed for the door. This will be the farthest thing from a vacation. Killian mingled with the crowd that was walking up the plank that led to the lady's fancy. The boat had been tethered there for 3 days, and as the bodies mounted the gangplank, the ship showed no signs of sinking. It should have been impossible for more than a few hundred people to board the ship, but it kept taking on passengers. Killian wondered what sort of spiritual nonsense was at play here. He'd checked his gun, made sure his disguise was in place, and added a few other things to his kit before he left. His spiritual knife, the little silver box Carla said would help identify spirits mingling with humans, and something the boys downstairs had been working on, which looked like a coffee thermos full of Java. They called it High Test, and they suggested using it only under extreme circumstances. Killian stepped up to the door, and when the bruiser in a 3-piece suit put a hand on him, he got a short look at the waterlogged corpse before it snapped back to its disguise. "Invitation," he said. Killian made a show of patting his pockets and then putting his hands to his face, giving his best "I must have left it in my other pants" look.
I'm Pulser, Michael Pulser. I'm with the lamppost. I'm expected to cover this little event, and you wouldn't want your mistress to miss out on the word of mouth, would you?
The bruiser consulted a list, found the name Killian had given him, and nodded. "Enjoy the party, Mr. Pulser." Killian assured him that he would, and swaggered into the lights and sounds of an active nightclub. Walking into the noise was like walking through the rubber ribbons on a car wash. It was a little cold, a little plasticky, and a lot uncomfortable. Killian shivered as he did so, realizing he was entering a spirit's domain and gritting his teeth. The domain in question was unlike anything he had ever seen. Jonathan Weston had been an ever-expanding house of stories and characters. Killian had been intrigued, right up until he was completely done with all the melodrama. But this ship was something else. It was like a floating pleasure palace. The dance floor was like something from the 1950s dance halls, and Killian could see men in uniform cutting a rug with women in a multitude of dresses. The men in uniform were from wars, plural, and they were joined by men in suits, men in chinos, men in slacks, and everything in between. The women were in hoop skirts, ball gowns, pantsuits, and anything else you could imagine, their hair in beehives and page boys, and all sorts of other styles. There were whole generations in this place, 100 years of fashion at least, and the music that played sounded more like a ghostly wail than most ghosts did. It was as if someone had smashed several periods worth of music together, and the dancers were doing a passable attempt at dancing to it as they waltzed and shucked and jived and bopped and gyrated across the floor. It was all a little nauseating, if Killian was being honest. Taking it all in was like trying too hard to find Waldo in one of those picture books, and it made him dizzy for the first time in a long time. Killian turned his back to it instead and headed for the bar, a thing that stretched along the wall like a saloon bar in a Tex Avery cartoon. The man behind it completed the illusion, his red and white stripes and arm garters crowned by his large and slightly curled mustache. He was filling glasses from a very modern soda gun, though by the smell, It dispensed anything but seltzer. He smiled at Killian, his complexion something like crude oil, and his teeth very white despite it. "What'll it be, Mac?" he said, setting down a tumbler in front of him, the ice appearing like magic.
"Whiskey,"
Killian said, as he leaned against the bar.
"and a little information."
"I got both," the man said, "though the information might cost you some."
Not me. I'm with the papers. The more information I have, the more sensational the story.
"Press, huh?" the bartender said, lifting the gun and sending a stream of amber liquid into the tumbler. "Been a lot of you flies buzzing around. Well, I guess I got time. The crowd here's pretty dead this time of night," he said, offering a wink that let Killian know he was more than pattering. "What you want to know?"
A lot of people here. A lot of people dancing, gambling, loving. But why? What's the story here?
The bartender shrugged. "The mistress, she likes to make people happy. You happy, Pally?"
As much as anyone else.
Killian took a sip of the whiskey. It wasn't bad. Quite the contrary. It was the whiskey he had sipped with his granddad. The glass he'd been told not to tell his mother about when he was 15. It was the glass that he'd drunk with Dom when they'd opened the agency. It was the glass he'd had on the balcony with his gal before he'd gone to the police academy. This wasn't whiskey. It was memory. And it was so good. "Careful there, Pally. That draft can be a little strong, especially if you ain't used to that kind of thing."
What is this place?
Killian asked it, not even aware that he had spoken aloud. "This place? It's Neverland. It's Elysium. It's the meeting place for all those lotus eaters. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, even if they don't." Killian was looking around, and it was only now that he noticed what he should have before. The gamblers, the dancers, the laughing gents, amidst a nest of beautiful ladies. They were all smiling, all laughing, but their eyes were like lost children. They were terrified beyond humor, confused, and they wouldn't leave because they didn't know the way. They had taken something more than their lives, something so diabolical that it should have been obvious right away.
How?
Killian turned back to the man, but he was gone. Gone, but not forgotten. Standing there now was a grinning specter, a bloated man in faded stripes, his right garter missing, and his mustache looking more like weeds than hair. One eye was hollow, but the other still held that laughing good cheer that he'd seen earlier. "How?" the corpse asked, not bothering to put its mask back on. "It's simple enough. I would think it would be easy for the great Killian Barger to figure out. The first drink is free. It's always free. But after that, they need to pay. You think the drinks are good," he said, cackling loud enough to rattle his bony jaws. "You should try one of the mistress's birds. They'll be whoever you want them to be. Your first love, your lost love, your own mother, they don't care. The cost, however, is steep. The currency here is memories, Mr. Barger. For spirits like us, that's all we got. The living gamble and whore and drink till they don't know who they are anymore. They only know that they want more. The dead, well, they do the same, but they do it until they fall away to nothing. You will too. It happens to all of them, eventually." He laughed, but Killian was already lunging from the bar and heading for the door. He'd been caught, drawn in like a rabbit in a trap, but if he moved quickly, he might make it before the teeth sank in. He pushed past the people coming in, but as the doorway came up before him, He cursed as the bruisers in the suits moved to block his escape. "Mr. Barger, the mistress wishes to speak with you. If you'll come with us, please." Killian stopped hard enough that he expected his shoes to make a breaking noise.
"Afraid you got the wrong fella, boys.
We know who you are, Mr. Barger. You come with us willingly or unwillingly. Either way, you're coming with us." Killian felt an itch to reach for his gun, but he could see the bulges of iron on these bruisers as well. Seemed Killian wasn't the only one packing this time. He could try to juke around them, maybe even make it, but there were 4 of them, and they looked big enough to block his path just by standing there. Carol had been pretty clear about not letting Morgana Tumbly see him, but it appeared he didn't have much of a choice.
"All right then, boys. Let's go see the dame and see what she's got to say."
The lead brute nodded, and they hemmed him in as they made for the grand staircase just off the side of the dance floor. Upstairs was more room for dancing, another smaller bar, and several little rooms that likely operated as cribs for the whores. Amidst it all was a raised bier, and upon that lifted surface was a throne. On the throne, surrounded by onlookers and sycophants, was a woman too grand to be allowed. She was a giant, a swollen woman with a head near the ceiling, and the ball gown she wore made her look like a chandelier. It was a gaudy mass of pearls and gems, the cloth like something from a queen's wardrobe, and her monstrous fingers sparkled with rings as she sat and observed him approach. The little gray box made noises in his pocket as he walked, and Killian gritted his teeth.
"Yeah, no kidding,"
he whispered to it. This was definitely the ghost section. The woman smiled as he came before her, craning his neck up as she towered over him. "So, you must be the infamous Killian Barger." Killian sketched a little bow, feeling ridiculously like the cat in that story as he stood before the ogre.
"I see my reputation precedes me."
"Oh, and such a reputation it is," she said, her voice not really matching the size of her. "They say you're the agency hitman, the problem solver, the one they send when things need to be done."
"I suppose that is the nature of facilitators."
"You are also the one who sent Weston to his eternal rest." Killian's nostrils flared as he breathed in deeply.
"And how did you happen to hear about that?"
She smiled, toothily, her dress tinkling a little as she held in a laugh. "News travels fast in the spirit world. So, have they sent you to do the same to me? I think you may find it more challenging than you believe."
"Actually, they sent me here to snoop. I was just supposed to see why you're keeping all these people here and report back."
The woman did laugh then, her jewels shaking like a china cabinet, but her mirth was not shared by the security men around her. There were 8 now, all of them looking very large and very armed. They clustered around her like a pack of hounds, ready to bite to keep their mistress safe. As she laughed, Killian put forth a little will and looked past her mask. Morgana Tully did not appear like any spirit that Killian had ever seen. Quite the contrary, she looked like the chandelier that he had thought she resembled upon their first meeting. Her skin was the color of old iron, her head like some monstrous coal furnace, and her body was a voluminous bell jar. Trapped within that jar were the agonized faces of souls that she had captured, and it was a true pirate's hoard of them. They were the jewels that she wore, he realized. If he looked a little closer at the many pearls and rubies on her gown, he would have seen that they held the souls of those trapped by her greed. She was a horde of energy, a giant of potential, and she was creating all of this by sheer will. Killian tried to stop from shaking, but it took a lot of will on his part, too. Then it appears we have caught a rat in our corn crib. And what do we do with rats, gentlemen? We eliminate them, said the one who had stopped Killian at the door. But as they reached for their guns, Killian was already in motion. He threw himself behind the bar as the first shot put a hole in his coat, and as he pulled out his own gun, he began to weigh his chances. He could fire 5, maybe 6 times, but any more, and he threatened to damage his essence. If he pushed it, he might manage 8 shots, but he would be tapped after that, and he knew it. He had the knife, but these guys had guns too. He could wait for them to come to him, but as something slammed through the bar to his left, something as large as a fist that shattered bottles behind him, Killian knew that wouldn't be an option either. Killian lifted his .38. He'd just have to make them count. He popped up but immediately fell down as their weapons erupted at him. Blasting bits of wood went everywhere as bullets slammed into the back of the bar. Killian gave it a count of 6 before he popped up and lobbed a shot. His aim was true, and one of the thugs fell back with a hole in his head. They shot some more, but Killian was content to play whack-a-thug as they blew holes in the thick wood around him. After 4 shots, the last going wide and missing, Killian was panting like a dog. He had 3 down and 5 to go, and his next shot took 1 in the chest and dropped him. Sweat was dribbling off him, and Killian knew that he couldn't keep this up. They seemed to have an endless supply of spirit to fire at him, and Killian realized that he'd be down to clubbing them before long. He peeked over the counter and winced back down as another one fired. He was right in front of the bar, and if Killian had been a second slower, he'd be extra dead. He drew his knife, listened to the steps, and as the thug leaned down to shoot him, Killian buried the knife in the man's arm. The thug reared back, but not quite fast enough. His rear turned into a fall, and Killian held the handle of his knife as he fell off it. "You can't hide forever," Morgana screamed. "This is my place, and my friends are limitless." Killian peeked around the bar and saw to his horror that the ghosts he had shot were getting back up. Their wounds closed, their bodies righted, and they lifted their weapons to fire again. Killian cursed. He was almost out of juice, and that was when he remembered the thermos in his pocket. Maybe, he thought, it was time to find a little more chutzpah. He drank it down, the whole thing tasting like old coffee, but the feeling of spiritual surge was immediate. He felt ready to go 10 rounds with Floyd Mayweather and then run a mile back home for some strenuous lovemaking with someone he'd charmed on the way there. When he rose again, he leveled his gun with confidence, and he had dropped 6 of them before bothering to check how he felt. He felt amazing, capital, on top of the world, and nothing could... Then he took one in the shoulder, and that ebbed a little of his eagerness. "It doesn't matter how many you kill, I will have you in the end," Morgana yelled. He moved without thinking, flipping the knife and taking a quick aim at the last one. He'd been practicing throwing the blade, wanting to have something that he could toss as well as stab with. But what he saw filled him with dread. They were getting back up as quick as he could put them down now, lifting their guns and shooting back before he could even catch his breath. He didn't know how much longer he could do this, and the supercharge was already starting to slip away. He was still on top of the world, but now he was a little afraid of the height. He had to do something, and fast, or he was going to be extra dead. He launched the knife, the blade going end over end, but the security guy sidestepped and lifted his gun to fire. "Kill him!" Morgana yelled. "Kill him! Kill that little sh..." But she abruptly stopped. and the security guy's shot never came. He had sidestepped, but she hadn't. The blade was buried to the hilt in her, something that wouldn't have been much of a problem if it weren't for the fact that Killian's knife was special. The magic on the blade called to the ectoplasm, ghost blood, and it just so happened to have a rich vein of it. The security guy turned, clearly sensing something was off, and Killian saw the others following suit. The giant woman looked down at the blade, her face confused and a little frightened. Then she exploded like a tanker full of propane. Killian was blown back, smacking himself against the glass and the wood of the bar, his vision swimming with stars as he glanced at something to the left of his cheek. It was his knife, and the blade was swirling with angry rainbows as it sat vibrating in the wood. The little box in his pocket was going off like a canary in a coal mine, and it wasn't hard to figure out why. The remnants of Morgana were belching out a steady stream of angry souls, and the whole place was bathed in a pale, liquid ghost fire. Killian grabbed the blade by the hilt, kinda glad it hadn't flown into him so he could be its next meal, and beat feet. The people downstairs were screaming, the normies having clearly regained their memories, and Killian stood at the top of the stairs and watched the stampede. The ship was taking on water, probably returning to its true form at the bottom of the Mississippi River, and Killian didn't really want to join it there. He came quickly at the tail of the line, and as his feet touched down on the dock, the ship slipped below the river level and slid under like a ghostly animal.
This is gonna be one hell of a report.
Killian watched it sink below the water and realized he was going to have some explaining to do when he got back to the agency. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.